Hey folks, today we're going to use BigQuery Workload Identity Federation to run some DBT Cloud jobs. Now, I've got a DBT Cloud project here, which is using the traditional way of connecting to BigQuery. So if you set this up at all, you know that to connect to BigQuery in deployment environments, at the moment you need to use this service account JSON file, which includes private key IDs and all this information, which we may not want to use, right? Now, if you go into BigQuery and go to your service accounts, the traditional way is that we go to the service account and then we generate a key like this. And then this key file includes the necessary information here, which we then upload to DBT Cloud. And that's how things happen, right? At the same time, I will also show how that service account is configured. So if I go to IAM and double check the service account, now you see the service account principal here has quite a lot of permissions to do things. This is just as an example, but this is why this particular service account can connect to BigQuery and to run jobs. That's because of the BigQuery admin role. So we're not be going down the path of trying to configure service accounts today, but we will be using this service account via the Workload Identity Federation and Entra to run a DBT Cloud job. So we're going to be switching out this way of connecting. Okay, now there's a couple of things we need to do. First things first, we need to actually create an Entra application. So here's my Azure portal. I'm going to go to Entra and go to app registrations, and I'm going to create a new DBT Cloud application. Here we will want to set this to the directory only, single tenant. And the redirect URI is not important here, so I will leave this blank. Okay, now we have our application registered. Next thing we want to do is also generate an application ID URI. We will use this later in GCP. So click that, go to add, and then save. Now we have this API with an ID here. Okay. Next thing we also want to do is we need to generate a secret. And then we want to store this secret value, not ID, somewhere else. So I'm coming here, I got a notepad on. So this is a secret which we will use later as well. Okay, so this is all the Entra setup. And the Entra setup is done. We will use the information here in GCP. So I'm back in GCP. I'm going to go to IAM and Workload Identity Federation. And what we want to do here is we want to create a new pool. And do something like that. And for provider, we want Open ID Connect or IDC. Here I'll call it Entra. Now the issuer URL will take on the format of and you want your directory ID here. And for the allowed audiences, here is where we want to use the redirect the application URI, which is this. Okay, and then here we can press continue. And then for the subject, we need assertion sub, like the example shown here. And then we want to save this pool. It's great. Okay, so our pool is created. The other thing we want to do is allow this pool to connect to service account as well. So back to our pool, which is this one here. Then we can do grant access to service account. And then I will pick this service account here, which we know already works because we have got a job running with that service account. And under principles, we want to go subject. And here, it should be the sub value from a JW token that we will be generating. Now, this here is a little bit complicated in terms of how to retrieve that. So the first thing we need to do is essentially generate a JWT access token. It's pretty complicated. But what we want to do is send a post request using Postman or curl or something like that. And we should be able to get the information we need. So let me copy the client ID. Scope should be this here. My secret should be this. Okay, so I've generated the request using Postman. And we need to kind of send something that looks like this. So we'll be sending a post request to this URL, which includes our directory here. This cookie is probably not needed, but it's generated by my app, my API testing app. The grant type, we want client credentials. The client ID is the client ID from here. Client secret is from here, which is the one we generated earlier. And the scope is this application ID URI here. And we add /.default. So if this works, we should be getting a JWT access token, like so. And the next thing we need to do is we need to copy this access token. And we need to generate, or we need to decode this so that we can get a sub value out of it. So I've got this little script here, which will help me do that. This requires JQ, or you can just use like something online to do this, right? So I'm going to add this and then get my access token. Then close it out. Yeah. And so I've decoded the JWT, and the value we want is this sub value right here, right? So I'm going to copy this subject and I'll put it over here. Now, that's pretty complicated, but you can also use something like this website here, JWT.io. Once you get the access token, you can just paste it here and you'll see the sub value here as well. I'm just wanting to do this locally, which is why I went down this route. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save this grant access to service token bit. And here, this field will form a pop-up if we don't need to use anything from here. So I'm going to just dismiss this. Perfect. Okay. Now we kind of have everything we need in terms of the setup in Entra. the setup in GCP, and we can now go back to dbt Cloud. Now, one of the things we need to do is first we need to configure a custom OAuth integration, which we'll then use in our new connection. So I will add a new OAuth integration, Entra. I call it BQ Workload. Identity Federation. Now, client ID, all of this comes from the Entra app. Secret, which I have here. The URL, application ID URI, which would be this. Now, for these two, authorized URL and token URL, we can get it from the endpoints bit here. So for token, we want to use this v2 token here. And for authorized URL, we want to use this right here. Okay, so I don't believe we will actually be using any of this. But for the token URL, we would be using this. You can see, for example, when I tried to first generate an access token, this is essentially what I used. So this is where this will go. Okay, so I'm going to save this new OAuth integration. That's done. And I'm going to create a brand new connection as well. And instead of using service account JSON, which you normally would, and then upload the JSON file that we downloaded, instead I'm going to use Workload Identity Federation, and then the project ID. I can just copy from GCP like so. And here you want to choose the external OAuth integration, which we just created before. If you remember, that's called BigQuery. And I'll leave the rest of this stuff alone. Now, this box here is telling you that Workload Identity Federation is not a method that would work with development. So this is just for deployment environments and just for writing jobs. So I'll go ahead and save that. And now I have a brand new connection, BigQuery with. Okay, now that we have our connection set up, we can go ahead and switch the connection over to the new one. But instead of switching, I'm going to just create a new deployment environment. This is just for demonstration, right? You can go ahead and switch, but I'm just going to create a new one. So this connection will be using with, and then the authentication method would be Workload Identity Federation. And this takes the format specified here. Now, this project ID, I should be able to get it from GCP. So that would be my project ID. The identity pool, that would be this value here, the name of the pool or the ID. And then the provider is Entra, which is consistent with the provider name right here. Okay. Now, for the second bit, which is service account impersonation URL, this is an example from our documentation. So I'm going to kind of copy this, put it here, and just missing a slash here. And the service account email is something we can get from back in GCP. So if I just go service accounts, and I know I connected to this one here. So we can kind of just copy that email right here. And I will put it, I'll just swap this out right here. Okay. And then let's put in a random data set. Now at this step, or at this stage, kind of we are ready to do a test. And we are green, so everything is good. We are going to save this. And I will create a random job here as well. And I'm going to run this job just to confirm that everything works properly. And we have done it, right? So our job, which is in our Workload Identity Federation environment, managed to build without any issues yet. And so that's all there is to it. So there's a lot of things that you need to configure. So you need to, as you can see, we need to create an Entra application and then generate some information here. We need to use the information in the GCP workload identity pool that we will be creating. You can see that we need to generate some values here as well, which we'll be using in the pool. And then we want to come back to dbt Cloud, make sure we have a custom auth integration, and then we want to create a connection that uses that custom auth integration. Then you'll want to go into your environment, use that connection, and then make sure to configure this correctly as well. Thank you.